Just a couple of weeks ago, before January 6th, an old friend, a college buddy, told me he had been taught the curse of Ham in Sunday school. We were discussing America at this time, and true Americans, faithful citizens, were stressed by the racist, anti-immigrant, and anti-native bias that surrounds us. He is in Washington and lives amongst many Native people, and they know the degree to which they, as a group, the Native Americans, have been stressed in this country. As he pointed out, America was set up to promote racial divisiveness. Isabel Wilkerson picks up this thread of promoting divisiveness in our society in her book, Caste, the Origins of Our Discontents. She writes, "These are the historical origins, the pillars upholding a belief system, the piers beneath the surface of a caste hierarchy. As these tenets took root in the firmament, it did not matter so much whether the assumptions were true, as most were not. It mattered little that they were misperceptions or distortions of convenience, as long as people accepted them and gained a sense of order and means of justification for the cruelties to which they had grown accustomed. Inequalities that they took to be the laws of nature." Wilkerson shares 8 pillars of caste in the 3rd of the 7 sections of her book. Now, this is a great text for looking at us from there. It is filled with insights on the way our American experience has been adapted from a societal system that originated in India. The first pillar of caste is divine will and the law of nature. It offers 2 slants on the religious foundation, something Joseph Campbell referred to as the stuck metaphors that frame the Indian and the American systems. One is on Manu, the other features Noah. You have heard most of this section in the readings on Manu and Noah. That's the first pillar. The second pillar is heritability. In a caste system, enslaved women give birth to slaves. In 1662, the Virginia legislature, comprised mostly of slaveholders, wrote a law that said that any child of any enslaved woman would be a slave for life, never, ever an heir to an inheritance. This would be true even if a slaveholder was the father of the child. Yes, even their children would be slaves for life. Can you see how this black-white split developed in our land, beginning in 1662, following a pattern set up in India? In India, both of our countries, India and the United States, were closely connected with England. And in England, there was a patriarchal heritage. In the United States and in India, that turned to a matriarchal heritability precept. Pillar 3, endogamy and the control of marriage and mating. The restriction of marriage to people within the same caste was brutally enforced. The primary method of keeping resources and affinity within tiers here in the United States was that a dominant caste saw others as less than human, an enemy, not of their kind, a threat to be held in check. Certainly not someone to marry, and so laws were established that prevented interracial marriage in our land for many, many years. Pillar 4, purity versus pollution. This builds on the previous pillar. In the United States, segregation between races showed up in many places. It appeared in hospitals, in ambulances, hearses, cemeteries, railroads, buses, schools, churches or temples, in textbooks, clothing stores, jails, and courtrooms. As a couple of examples, segregation became so deeply established that a fear of touching anything once touched by a person of color led to there being white Bibles and black Bibles in courtrooms. Another example are beaches. An invisible line separated white water from black water. When 17-year-old Eugene Williams unwittingly crossed this invisible line at Chicago's Lake, Michigan, this was in 1919, Eugene was stoned. Eugene was drowned. Pillar 5, occupational hierarchy, the Jutties and the Mudsill. The Jutties were not only the lowest caste, the lowest of the lowest castes in India. They were also considered mudsills. What are mudsills? A U.S. Senate speech by Senator James Hammond of South Carolina provides an answer. When a house is being built, dear senators, the most important piece of the framework is the mudsill, the sill plate, which bears the weight of the entire structure above it. With castes, the mudsill is the bottom caste that everything rests upon. All social systems need a class to do the menial duties, the drudgery of life, a class requiring but a low order of intellect and skill, the very mudsill of society. Senator Hammond shared these words in March 1858. And soon after he said them, South Carolina wrote a post-slavery law into its books that said black people were banned from any labor other than farm or domestic work, thereby repositioning those who had formerly been slaves to the lowest point, the mudsill in their occupational hierarchy. Pillar 6, dehumanization and stigma. Human society has in-groups and out-groups. Now, it is difficult to stigmatize people on an individual basis. You get to know them, it's difficult to do. This is where the caste system is necessary because it sets up a group or groups for the entire dehumanization process. As it does so, it quickly becomes comfortable for those in the higher level of caste or class, that too, to see the worst of the worst among those in the out group. Pillar 7, terror as enforcement, cruelty as a means of control. The way to keep sentient beings in an artificially fixed place is with violence and terror, psychological and physical. to preempt resistance before it can be imagined. Let me reread that. The way to keep sentient beings in an artificially fixed place is with violence and terror, psychological and physical, to preempt resistance before it can be imagined. The whip was the most common instrument of punishment. Nearly every slaveholder used it. Few grown slaves escaped it entirely. The whip. Homicide, rape, assault, and battery were felonies in the slavery area. Wrong, immoral, reprehensible everywhere. But we, America, allowed most any atrocity to be inflicted on black bodies. 12 generations of African Americans faced the ever-present danger of assault and battery, or worse, every day of their lives during a quarter millennium of enslavement. Now we could stop here after the first 7 pillars, and we might say, those are the old ways, it is not like that anymore. And I suppose until this old week, some might have said those words very easily and found supportive listeners. It becomes more difficult after this past week, because what we have seen is a powerful reminder that racism survives in our land. It has a mighty grip. Your representatives and your senators scurried to hide when white rioters broke into the Capitol. I would suggest to you that the mob at the Capitol were following what has become for them an important, pivotal notion, the 8th pillar of caste. And that 8th pillar is that there is in society an inherent superiority versus inherent inferiority mindset. And that mindset has held sway in America and has held sway over many who are rioting, storming the Capitol, following along with QAnon, whatever they are doing today. This inherent superiority versus inherent inferiority stems from the first 7 pillars: the religious framing, the heredity, and the way that carried on, the control and separation of mating, the purity as some see themselves versus the pollution, not shared by all, but for some, yes. There has been and continues occupational trauma for African Americans, for Hispanics, for immigrants in this country. There is a dehumanization that comes with it. And terror, fear, putting people down, assaulting them if necessary. All of these contribute to the 8th pillar, the summation of these pillars of caste. Inherent superiority of some, inherent inferiority of others. Now, I would confess to you that many of us, and I count myself here, have not known about this 8th pillar of caste or deeply considered it. But now, eyes opened through the reading of this wonderful text, Caste, the Origins of Our Discontents, I have been challenged to look at it through my UU eyes. And when doing so, I could see that the inherent worth and dignity of every person, The first UU principle belies any possibility of an inherent superiority versus inherent inferiority approach to life and to living. The inherent worth and dignity of every person does not and cannot, nor can it ever in any way be justified in terms of an inherent superiority versus inherent inferiority split. And yet, this has been a challenge because that's the society that we've lived in for so long. I say to you as a person of privilege, and I speak here particularly to white liberal religionists, we have allowed us to slip away from looking at us from another point of view. We've lived within the mindset. Truth be told, I was raised in a sundown city. People of color had to leave my hometown during the years I was growing up. True of my town in Wisconsin, true too of my town in Iowa. I suggest that we have missed seeing America, the land of the free, the home of the brave, a country that we salute and love in our hearts as that incubator of a superior, inferior ideology. Martin Luther King Jr. addressed this predicament in his letter from the Birmingham jail. He wrote, "The white moderate is the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom. They are more devoted to order than to justice. They prefer a negative peace." Listen to this, friends. They prefer a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, the presence of justice. He shared these words well after he visited India. And he had gone to India at the invitation of Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. King went to study a people whose fight for freedom from British rule had inspired his fight for justice in America, passive resistance. But during that trip, he and his wife made an appearance at a high school in southern India, at a school where students were from families that have been untouchables. As they were gathering to meet, the principal introduced Dr. King with these words, "Young people, I would like to present to you a fellow untouchable from the United States of America." Wilkerson writes, King was floored. He had not expected that term to be applied to him. He was, in fact, put off by it at first. There's more to this story. It's in the text. But here's the thing. Even if King had not been looking at us from there, even King, here's the thing, had not been looking at us from there until he went there. The truth of what it means to live with an inherent superior, inherent inferior umbrella had swooped over all of life. And that was brought home to him when he went to India, because he was once again able to see from that point of view more about what exactly he had been fighting here in the United States of America. And so, my friends, I would say that Caste is a powerful book. It is filled with the stories of the struggle for survival, particularly for people of color. Yet it ripples with wave after wave of wisdom. I must share with you the words of Charlotte Simonon, who said, "Isabel Wilkerson's book should be required reading for every teacher, lawyer, judge, social worker, politician, and anyone else that pretends to support the values of U.S. democracy, our Constitution, and human value." We only looked at a small section of the text, the third of its 7 sections, the section that looked particularly at the pillars of caste. And so today, as we celebrate the Herculean efforts made by the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. during his lifetime, and as we look forward to the inauguration of the next President of the United States, it's about time. May we remember that we too have neighbors, and that each of them, each and every one of them, is valued for their inherent worth and their dignity. As Aretha Franklin said, respect. May we venture together toward that world I still dream about, one filled with people who promote and affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person, as well as in the principle that drew me to this faith, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Let me move toward Dr. King and toward the tradition from which he preached, tapping into my childhood, and close with an alternative vision of a different mythos that grew out of the Christian tradition in America. With this: Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world, red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in his sight. Jesus loves the little children of the world. May the love in your hearts find love in the hearts of those around you. Namaste.